This week, I want to touch on a topic that I've actually talked about extensively in my articles, as well as a number of podcasts I've been on discussing the subject, and that is the ever present danger of lone wolf mass casualty attackers. So, when we talk about a lone wolf actor, what we're referring to is an individual that acts out mass violence of some kind but does it autonomously. They may be inspired or claim to be inspired by, for example, a terrorist group or some extremist cause. However, they act alone. They're not directly funded by the group. They're not trained by the group, etc. They really act alone, even though, again, they may swear allegiance to a particular extremist group, or they may actually even get in touch with those groups, but they are not being directly supported. Okay. So here's the thing about lone wolf attackers in our history in continental United States. Unlike Europe, our minority populations of, for example, Middle Eastern people, Muslims, etc., is actually very stable. And what I mean by that is there is no larger percentage of mass casualty violence that comes from those populations compared to the regular population. 9/11 was conducted by foreign actors. That is a different thing. Okay, we're talking about lone wolf activity. So, for example, Pulse nightclub, San Bernardino, the Boston bombing, those were lone wolf actors to an extent, although they all, again, were in touch with a particular terrorist group for, if nothing else, inspiration. But again, those factor into our overall paradigm of mass casualty violence, where the majority of which in this country is perpetrated by actually white Caucasian males, although in the past few years we've seen a lot of females getting involved with that, of course. But generally, now that's because Caucasian males are, again, the highest percentage in the population among men, obviously, still. Okay, so my point is lone wolf activity is almost directly correlated to the percentage of the population percentage for that group. Now, what manifests differently will be the ideology that is expressed, usually after the fact. So if you have some, white loser incel guy, he maybe wrote a manifesto all about how terrible capitalism is and, how he wants to inspire some, movement. Or maybe it's as simple and pathetic as everybody at work or at school were mean to him. This kind of thing, okay? If it's a Middle Eastern guy, it will manifest as a last-minute sworn allegiance to ISIS. So it's that kind of weird stuff. So it's the same kind of psychology in these guys. It just will manifest differently, not so much in the violence, but in what is the declared motive for the violence, very often right at the very end. So my point is this: with lone wolf attacks, it is an ever-present. Now, we are closely monitoring, of course, those of us in the know, and I hope you're one of the people in the know, where a lot of very credible ex-intelligence people are warning us that there is an inevitable mass terrorist event that's going to happen in the continental United States. Let's hope they are wrong, but if they are right, what they are predicting is a coordinated mass attack carried out by foreign emissaries of terrorist groups. That, again, is a totally different thing than the lone wolf issue that we deal with. Now, here's where things can change, and we've seen this already. International events can inspire an uptick in lone wolf violence. The guy who, as part of, radical Islamic Jihad, drove a truck through the street in New Orleans and killed a bunch of people, that's an example of it. That's a guy who's, grew up in the United States. Prior to this, there was no real semblance of an issue with this guy. And then, for whatever reason, he breaks, possibly inspired by foreign events, whatever the case may be, and he carries out this attack. So foreign conflicts and political situations can influence an uptick in certain kinds of lone wolf attacks. For example, domestic politics can inspire that. I can tell you as an example that far left extremism is a real thing, and so is far right extremism. There's no denying that. Think of the Oklahoma City bombing, right? Timothy McVeigh. That was a far right ideology that caused that. Now, currently, we've seen a number of things that are far left extremism. Trump derangement syndrome is very real, so we may see more of that. My point with the discussion on lone wolves is this: who cares what the motivation is? Is it Islamo-fascist jihad? Is it Trump derangement syndrome? Is it far-right ideology? Who cares? To commit such a heinous act, you have to be a psychopathic and sociopathic individual who is truly crazy, okay? And each population, each segment of the population, rather, within the United States contributes almost the same minuscule percentage towards this kind of violence. It's minuscule, but again, it only takes one, right? It only takes one every once in a while who can cause a catastrophic event. Now, the thing is, with these lone wolf attacks, we're usually dealing with a single individual, on very rare circumstances, a couple of individuals. You, as the concealed carrier, if you're at ground zero, have the opportunity to make all the difference. You must stay armed, be armed at all times, everywhere you go, avoid the places that disarm you, and hopefully the next one that transpires will be yet another check mark for the good guys, where we have one of our own at ground zero, and the only person who leaves in a bag is the monster who shows up there to do harm.